But there's also the future kingdom. There was disillusionment. There was disappointment. There was sin and failure, particularly as the nation was divided and went into exile. And it's now that the prophets rise. And they begin to understand, under the Holy Spirit, that the Messiah and the kingdom must lie in the future. They look at it first on an earthly level. Israel will be restored as a nation. Her enemies will be crushed. The Lord will reign in Jerusalem in a kingdom of righteousness, peace, and blessing. Isaiah 24 and 27, the Lord of hosts reigns on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem. Israel shall blossom and put forth shoots and fill the whole world with fruit. Those who were lost in the land of Assyria and those who were driven out to the land of Egypt will come and worship the Lord on the holy mountain at Jerusalem. So there's that, if you like, earthly, national, physical strand in the prophetic faith. But more and more we find breaking through events associated with the kingdom, which cannot be contained in any purely physical, earthly understanding. Isaiah 51, the heavens will vanish like smoke. The earth will wear out like a garment, but my salvation will be forever. Isaiah 25, he will swallow up on this mountain the covering that is cast over all peoples, the veil that is spread over all nations. He will swallow up death forever. This is part of the kingdom. Isaiah 26:19, your dead shall live, their bodies shall rise. You who dwell in the dust, awake and sing for joy. This is part of the kingdom. Even more spectacularly, perhaps, Isaiah 65:17. For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things shall not be remembered or come into mind. Now it is true that the people may have become engrossed with the first strand in prophecy and obsessed with that. But it is the second which is truly determinative. Heaven will come down to earth, and that kingdom will be transcendent and eternal. So you've got the present kingdom and the future kingdom. You understand why I'm using these terms, not as two different kingdoms, but different aspects. And then, of course, there's the promised deliverer. More and more, the hopes of the people were wrapped up in the coming Messiah, through whom the Lord will assert his kingship. The verses are familiar to you. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end, on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. And as we sing so often, he shall have dominion from sea to sea, and from the river to the ends of the earth. People shall be blessed in him. All nations shall call him blessed. The whole earth shall be filled with his glory. The present kingdom, the future kingdom, and the promised deliverer. I want finally, in this first session, to illustrate this outline again from the book of Daniel. The Jews are in exile. It is a time of utter black despair. Their whole world has collapsed. They are in ruin. They have no king. They have no temple. They have no land. They have nothing. They are in the grip of a mighty world empire. What about the kingdom now? Where's your kingdom now? How shall we sing the Lord's song while in a foreign land? The book of Daniel is given to teach God's people to sing the Lord's song in a foreign land. And it is a magnificent kingdom statement to shattered, discouraged people. How relevant for our own day. The same three themes. First of all, the present kingdom. It seems non-existent, a myth. But chapters 1 to 6 have one great message. Everyone and everything is in God's hands. It comes right at the beginning in the first chapter and the second verse, and they're talking about the exile, the destruction of Jerusalem. And we read, the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into Nebuchadnezzar's hand. There's the context right away. There's the whole book right away. That's everything. The Lord gave him. Nebuchadnezzar didn't capture Jerusalem. The Lord gave Jerusalem to Nebuchadnezzar. Later on, in almost a chance providence, God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. God actually worked on the psyche of a Babylonian civil servant to cause him to like this young Hebrew immigrant. What's that saying to the people who are reading it? In chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and God reveals it. And the king answered and said to Daniel, truly, your God is the God of gods, and the Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries. That's the greatest monarch on earth. Chapter 3. Nebuchadnezzar tries to destroy the three young rebels, but God protects them in the fire. The king says, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb. Nebuchadnezzar's really getting into this. And their houses laid in ruins. For there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. Chapter 4. Nebuchadnezzar again breaks loose in pride. Is not this great Babylon, which I have built by my mighty power, as a royal residence, and for the glory of my majesty? And God brings him down and breaks him. And Daniel says, until you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will. The next chapter, chapter 5, Belshazzar mocks, and a hand appears and writes on the wall. And that night, Belshazzar was slain. Chapter 6, Darius puts Daniel in a den of lions, but God delivers him, leading the king to say, I make a decree that in all my royal dominion people are to tremble and fear before the Lord, the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. So here you have Daniel looking at discouraged, demoralized, vulnerable, exiled people. And he drives home the message again and again and again. God is still king. Hold on to that. And you've the most magnificent, perhaps, statement of his sovereignty in the Old Testament in chapter 4:34. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. He does according to his will among the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. And no one can stay his hand or say to him, what have you done? It's not surprising that in the 1980s, Christians in Eastern Europe and China, when they were writing to the West and asking for books of the Bible to be translated, their number one choice was Daniel. Translate Daniel into our language. We need to hear this. God's above the Nebuchadnezzars. So you have the present kingdom, although all seems to be against it. Then you have the future kingdom. God is king. That's wonderful. But actually it's not all that great, because we're having an absolutely miserable time every day. Is this all there is? Is this it? Is this the kingdom? Is this the whole deal? We're really glad he's king. We're really glad he's sovereign. But what about all these awful things that are happening in our lives all the time? Sin is present and active. There's great opposition. What about the promises? And so, in chapter 2, we've got the four-part statue. The kingdoms of the world, and it's smashed to pieces by the rock, cut out, not by human hands. In the days of those kings, I'll not give you the references because they're in the outline. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall that kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end. It shall stand forever. So there is a future kingdom. Or the four beasts in chapter 7. Destructive and terrible. 4 kingdoms. Followed by 10 horns and a little horn. And finally they're destroyed. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. Their kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey them. The future kingdom. And then the promised deliverer. This future kingdom is apparently to be in the hands of a mysterious eschatological figure. And of course the classic passage is 7:13 and 14. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one, like a son of man. And he came to the Ancient of Days, and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples and nations and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom is one that shall not be destroyed. The present kingdom, the promised deliverer, and the future kingdom. And so when John and Jesus announced the imminence and the presence of the kingdom, they were saying that this moment of supreme intervention was at hand. The Redeemer had come to bring God's perfect kingdom, the presence of the future. The Bible has one consistent message, and we must understand Jesus Christ in the light of it. He's the one for whom history has been waiting. He is God as king, acting as a king. He's the kingly action of God. He's the bringer of final grace and final judgment. Thank you.
A couple questions.
Thank you. Ted, I've struggled with trying to identify present kingdom versus future kingdom. So I've started to use the words dominion and domain. Are those good distinctions? Or rule versus reign? God's reigning over everything, but the problem is not everything is under his rule. What terms do you use? Sort of, we know that Jesus is king, but we do not yet see all things under him. How would you define those, or what words would you use?
There's one other way of answering questions, which is to say, I'm glad you asked me that. That's what our politicians always say. I'm glad you asked me that. And that's the last you hear of the question or the answer. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, Dean. I could see rule and reign. Yeah. I suppose we just always have to explain what we're saying, don't we? The contrast and the tension between that already and not yet. Here's another answer. We'll be looking at that in a later lecture.
Another question? Up here up front, I guess. Al. By the way, this is Al Wisner. We want to thank Al for his service in providing the taping for us today.
I knew I'd use this. I wouldn't. I was just thinking when you were talking earlier about the rival kingdoms. Do you think that's somehow represented in the division of Judah and Israel? And the reason I'm thinking that is that Judah at times was blessed with God-fearing kings, whereas Israel always had godless kings.
I think I would want to think about that a bit more. I'm not sure about that, Israel and Judah.
Good answer.
One illustration we've used at home due to the Northern Ireland Troubles, there were times in the past when paramilitaries would take over part of a city. The police didn't go in there. Their rule ran in that part of the city. So if you like, they had a kingdom, but it was utterly illegitimate. It had no right to exist. It wasn't going to exist very long. So if you want to call Satan, the Bible calls him the prince of this world and the authority of this world, but we must never smuggle in the idea that there's any legitimacy or right to it. It is completely illegitimate, the whole thing, and it's under God's authority is going to be crushed.